What can the precedents of pre-bid and header bid for display ads teach us about podcast ads? That's what we're looking into today on the Sounds Profitable podcast.
Special thanks to our partners for making Sounds Profitable possible. Check them out by going to soundsprofitable.com and clicking on their logos in the articles.
Welcome to the Sounds Profitable podcast. I'm Arielle Nissenblatt. On the show today, Bryan Barletta will be in conversation with Jordan Bentley, founder of Audiohook. This episode is all about pre-bid, header bid, display ads, and what they can teach us about the future of ad tech for audio. I'm here to introduce the topic with Bryan, lead you into his chat with Jordan, and then I'll be back at the end to give some key takeaways. First, let's say hey to Bryan. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? It's a cold and rainy day in Texas today.
Boo. Hate to hear it, but we will be in Texas soon together the Sounds Profitable Q1 Summit, right?
Yeah, at South by Southwest. You don't need a badge.
South by Southwest.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I mean, it's very interesting, a very humbling moment for me because we've had the opportunity to run 2 events so far, and a lot of it is with our existing partners, right? We're able to say like, hey, we're going to do this thing. It's going to be really cool. It's an add-on here. It's in New York or whatnot. And we've had amazing attendance because they're all people we know and we work with. The South by Southwest one is really, we believe that podcasting needs to be at major events where there's media, advertising, marketing, content creation, all of that. Like, we need to be part of the bigger scene. We can't just keep talking to each other at podcast events. So we decided to buy into South by Southwest for this. But yeah, it's very interesting because the people that we're reaching out to as we're talking to new buyers, they're like, this sounds interesting, but what sounds profitable? I'm like, oh,
sounds interesting.
Okay.
Sounds profitable.
Sounds interesting. Sounds profitable. That's our new catchphrase.
That's how you attract new people. Does this sound interesting to you? Then this sounds profitable.
It's been fun, and it's been like realizing that like the next group of people that we have to teach about podcasting has no experience with us and no experience with podcasting, and we have to start from scratch. And that's why I'm so excited. You know, you're on as our co-host, and that helps a lot. Manuela came on for head of operations. Tom is a killer storyteller, leading research, and Gavin's leading their own newsletter now with the download. So we've got a really fleshed out team to really take that on and really explain what we can do and provide as much as possible for the industry that we work with and the industries we want to get into.
And just before the Q1 Summit at South by Southwest, we will be at Podcast Movement. Talk to me a little bit about what Sounds Profitable is going to be doing at Podcast Movement for partners.
Yeah. So the venue is about 20 minutes away from the Strip. And I hear that Vegas has a reputation for being alluring and to pull people away from the things that they want to do. And I wanted to make sure that all of our partners had an appropriate space to be able to hold business meetings, right? If you look at what we did at Dallas or in LA, we just sat at the coffee shop or we sat at the bar. And while it was great that there was food and drink there, not knocking that in any way, it wasn't part of the main space, right? If you met up with somebody at the end of a session, it could be kind of a pain to get them into a conversation without walking a far distance. So this venue actually had basically another space about half the size of the total expo hall, right at the end of one end of the expo hall. We were able to work with Podcast Movement to make it the Sounds Profitable Business Lounge. And the intent there is that any of our partners, and if you work at a partner company, you're going to have a sticker waiting for you when you get your badge, will be able to use that space whenever they want and bring in business contacts, right? People that you want to have a conversation with as your guests into that space. There'll be 3 or 4 semi-private 8 to 12 person couch pods, plenty of standing room, an open courtyard. We weren't able to secure food or drink, but I'm going to put together a pirate map that kind of identifies where all the free food and drink is on the main floor. And it's just a place for you guys to be able to have a quick meeting, right? Our goal is to empower our partners to do as much business as possible and grow podcasting. And so that means our own events that push into new spaces and partnering with events that we're all at so that everybody has all the tools they need to succeed.
Speaking of partners, today on the show, you are speaking with Jordan Bentley of Audiohook, who has been a partner of Sounds Profitable for a while. You actually spoke with Jordan last year on the Sounds Profitable podcast. You spoke with him about programmatic and transparency and what podcast publishers can learn from the precedents set by other advertising channels. We are all about precedents, learning from the past, iterating, and looking towards the future in general at Sounds Profitable. But your conversation with Jordan last year was about precedents, and today it's also about precedents. His background is in advertising, so it makes sense that he's bringing us all of this knowledge. He's been in the advertising space for a while, as have you. I actually just listened to you, Bryan, on the Marketecture podcast. I loved that. I learned so much about you. I think everybody should listen to that. But that was actually a really cool way for folks who are very entrenched in the ad tech space, but not so entrenched in the podcast space to learn about podcast ad tech. So just an aside, I think folks should go listen to that episode. Where can people find that? That was dropped on our feed. Is that right?
I think we had it on our feed, and it might be good to revisit it there, but you can definitely get it in Martech, and we'll make sure that we put it in the episode details so that you can get a link out to it.
Absolutely. That was just an aside, but we're all about precedents here at Sounds Profitable, learning from the past, looking towards the future. So Bryan, what made you want to discuss pre-bid and header bid with Jordan at this time?
I think that programmatic and like all the advertising things that we're digging into now are things that we can learn from other industries. You know, it's funny. I just spoke with Rocky Thomas at SoundStack recently. We were talking about how some of the things in CTV are actually learning from what we did 5 or 10 years ago in podcasting. And it's funny to see how each industry kind of learns and changes based on the others. There's room in podcasting for us to learn more mainstream ad tech. We've kind of built a lot of things in silo because we were treated as a silo. But as we find our way into these more mainstream conversations, we really do need to adhere to their guidelines or learn from them. Jordan is fun to talk to because there are very few DSPs in podcasting, right? There's AdsWiz, that's podcasting first, or audio first, and they do a really great job. And then the jump's massive, right? Like the jump gets very large. It goes to basically Trade Desk next. And so talking with Jordan, who can be agile and dive into these things that they need to do, which is a little bit harder for some of these larger companies, is exciting because Jordan's experience is outside the space. Jordan has great podcast experience, but when we talk about these things, we're able to kind of identify where the roadblock or even just speed bump would be for Jordan and where the things I need to catch up on are. Programmatic is so powerful, and that's going to continue to be a major part of conversations because there's misconceptions that we need to clear up, and there's changes to how we do programmatic today that we can make to make things more efficient and make everybody more money. And that's why this was an important conversation to have now, especially as we're kicking off a year where people are trying their hardest to fill all their inventory.
With that, let's get into your conversation with Jordan Bentley, founder of Audiohook.
Jordan, thank you so much for joining me again. I'm always happy to have you back on the show. Today, we're going to really dig into something fun. So we're going to dig into pre-bid. It's a term in programmatic. Me and you have been talking about it for a while. You're leading up something really cool in this space that I'm really excited to get into more of and let people know about. But let's talk about what pre-bid is. Let's dive right into it. On the programmatic sense, programmatic advertising, what does pre-bid mean?
So pre-bid is a solution that came out of some frustration that a lot of display web publishers were having. And so ultimately, it's a solution for publishers to help them better monetize that inventory. So that's the 9,000 foot view. There's a bunch of frameworks and guardrails, if you will, that have been added around pre-bid. So pre-bid is an independent organization that oversees and manages specifications around what we call pre-bid. Now, another term that you may have heard of that's often used synonymously is header bidding. Are you familiar with the term header bidding? And
I am. So pre-bid's like the Kleenex to the tissue. Is that what this is?
Yes. Both of those are really old brands. So the Xerox to the copier as well. But yeah, so header bidding is the more generalized term. And if we have a brief history lesson, back in the late 2000s, a number of ad tech companies started coming up with header bidding solutions. And pre-bid was established as an independent effort to provide an open source solution that publishers could leverage and trust that was agnostic of any ad tech vendor.
So let's walk through the technical of it. How does it work? Like, we're going to talk display first, right?
Sure. Yeah. So it got its roots in display. And again, it may be helpful to go take a few steps back on the history lesson here, where when publishers started implementing programmatic for display, they would use an SSP. Now, as programmatic became more popular, more SSPs were getting started and growing. And so publishers were faced with this challenge of having 2, 3, 4, 5 SSP partners all coming to them saying, hey, we can help you monetize better. We can get you higher CPMs. We can get you better fill. But the way the stack worked at the time is using this term called waterfall, where you had to pick one SSP to be like the SSP. And if they didn't fill it, then you could call another SSP. And if they didn't fill it, then you could call another SSP. But all of this, Bryan, takes time, right? All of this stuff that's happening in the background is happening while a consumer is on this publisher's website, and ads aren't being served, and publishers aren't helping kind of capture some of that value. And so header bidding was this idea of, what if we made a unified auction that happened at the exact time, a unified auction that called everybody at the same time, and it happened in the header of the browser. So that's where this term comes from, is on web pages, you have a header that first loads before the rest of the body or content of the web page loads. And so again, giving kind of the before and after comparison, before, all of these tags to load ads would happen in the body. They would call the ad server, generally DoubleClick for publishers. And then published, and then DFP, DoubleClick for publishers, would then call these exchanges. In the header bidding solution, before DFP was even called, in the header of the page, a request would be made to one or more partners to say, hey, who wants to serve an ad to this person? And instead of doing it in a waterfall manner, it would do it all asynchronously. It would call them all out. And then everybody that responded in time would be evaluated. And then it would pass that information into DFP ahead of time, right? So now when DFP was like, oh, let's serve an ad, it already has all the information. It's already pinged the 5 different ad exchanges or SSPs and said, who has the highest bid? How much are they willing to bid? Who's the advertiser? And so now publishers could, rather than having to hope that the first person in the waterfall was actually giving them the highest bid, they were actually able to compete on price, which is a really key component in monetizing, in monetization for publishers, regardless of if you're doing programmatic or not. It's saying, hey, we should sell this ad to whoever is going to give us the most money, as long as they meet our brand standards and other requirements, that fit with our publication. So let me pause there.
Yeah, no, that's a great place to pause. I mean, podcasting today is struggles a little bit with that, because how we tend to sell is about guaranteed inventory. I actually don't know what started that. I think a lot of it comes from the mindset of baked in and trying to mimic that into dynamic ad insertion, but it gets a little complicated there, because we're still talking about a lot of people doing direct sold, whether programmatically, dynamically inserted, baked in, but whatever, like you represent your inventory first and then opening it up to multiple partners or multiple campaigns to compete. I do think that there's a better near-term future where we get better mastery of our inventory. I think it's coming. I think it's very clear that we're working on that. And when that happens, we're going to be able to compete everything at the same time. You and a handful of other partners who have substantial experience in advertising outside of podcasting see that coming. And I agree with you, it's going to get there. But today, I mean, you're right. Like, if we think through the standard ad server, every single ad slot, right? Let's say you have 4 different slots in an episode, right? Pre-roll, 2 mid-rolls, a post-roll. We're talking about a waterfall, not only on like the type, so direct sold, second seat seller, programmatic promo. We're also talking about the differences in there. How many direct campaigns do you have? How many direct opportunities does your second seat seller have? How many programmatic calls do you make out externally? The direct stuff should be pretty quick. I mean, we're talking about really instant because it's all local. It's making that decision. It can pre-make some of that decision the second that download comes out. But those external calls, the programmatic calls, each have couple hundred milliseconds to respond. And if you start calling multiple of them sequentially, like what could happen is theoretically by your second mid-roll, the whole episode could be timed out. It could decide that it has to build the episode. And we're not just talking about the programmatic ads not filling in your mid-roll and post-roll. We're also talking about your direct sales not filling in the last mid-roll and the last post-roll, which is really scary. So
yeah, and so that's where this timing becomes really important. To your point, it doesn't take very many delays, right? When you have this daisy chain effect, it doesn't take much of a delay from any one partner to really cause issues. And the other thing to talk about here when we talk about header bidding, going back to again, just talking in general about publishers is it's not just the programmatic campaigns competing with each other. It's also about having all demand compete with each other. Again, this is a choice that publishers can make. But, in my former life, I worked with a lot of web publishers on the display side. And it was interesting to see that oftentimes their internal sales reps would sell stuff at like half the CPM that a programmatic campaign could get. And oftentimes when you talk to publishers and you talk to some of those sellers, right? The sellers are getting pushback from agencies, from brands saying, oh, well, we can get cheaper CPMs. We can do this. And the sales reps, look, they're just trying to do a good job. They're just trying to keep their job. I'm not hating on them I'm not hating on them by any point here. And so what this does is header bidding then kind of allows everybody to be checked and kept in place, because it's like, oh, hey, if my programmatic display CPM is $2, well, I shouldn't be selling stuff for $1, right? I should be selling stuff for $2, or a point that you've often made in the past is $3, because you then have to pay commissions for the sales rep and he's getting a salary and all these other things. So it's a great balance for both parties, for direct sales, for promos, for programmatic, to just, help see alignment there. Again, not saying that anybody's doing a bad job, but it's helpful to go back to that agency or that brand and say, unfortunately, I just can't make this number work because we have other advertisers willing to pay more money. I love you guys as a client. I would love to keep your business. Unfortunately, there are other great advertisers that are willing to pay more. It doesn't really matter the channel that they're coming through. It's that they're willing to pay more, and the publisher, if they're wanting to, optimize for revenue or yield, should be directing dollars there. So
let me jump in real quick there. Once we move away from the guaranteed impressions, that's what's really powerful, right? Like you said, even direct sales, forget about even getting into programmatic. Like if you are able to compete, right? Obviously it's super okay to have a price point that says 100% share of voice, right? It's always okay.
Sure.
But we have to, as an industry, move away from this mindset that every campaign is guaranteed its impressions. We need to let things compete. We need to be comfortable with campaigns that don't deliver their full amount, but still deliver value at the price point the partner was willing to pay based on the value that the publisher could get out of that ad campaign. But as we dig into this a little bit more with pre-bid, which I'm so excited to have you here to talk about, the biggest point of confusion for me, and me and you've talked about this a little bit, consistently is SSPs versus pre-bid. So programmatic in podcasting is not done completely right. Today, a lot of that setup is through a VAS tag, a video ad serving template, right? There used to be DAS, the digital audio ad serving template. They combined it all together. Happy to share any more information in the show notes for people who want to learn more about this. But that effectively today is called almost like a campaign. Instead of putting the MP3 in there, you put that call that calls one endpoint, and that endpoint's an ad server, and says, what do you got for me? Now, that endpoint can have things locally, and there are partners out there that today in podcasting actually just make a single VAST call for all of their slots to another ad server where they handle everything outside of their hosting platform, which is really exciting. But the difference between pre-bid, which allows you to call a bunch of SSPs and a bunch of DSPs, basically anybody with demand or who can get you demand, versus an SSP, which is meant to call all those demand partners at once. Can you walk me through the differences between pre-bid and SSP?
Yeah. So at a very high level, if there was a world where there was only one SSP, you wouldn't really need header bidding. You wouldn't need pre-bid because one SSP makes all those calls in that same fashion, and there isn't really a difference in value to be relayed. Now, the reality is a few problems come up if we all lived in a world where there was only one SSP, right? Yeah, SSP can slowly over time charge higher fees, right? We've seen that with, some of our utilities, right? Whether it's electricity or gas and there's a reason that government comes in and regulates some of that stuff. And so when you have just one SSP, you lose that competition, is the downside. And so header bidding allows a publisher to keep either that SSP or any of their demand partners kind of in check by, again, making them compete. It doesn't allow one person to kind of put their thumb or finger on the scale and decide what should happen. It puts all of those tools in the hands of the publisher, and then the publisher ultimately can decide. So if we go back to our history lesson where we had 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 SSPs, a lot of this stuff gets complicated because they have different fill rates, they have different CPMs, they're charging different rates, they have different fee structures. And so it's not always clear of like, oh, just because, SSP X gives me the lowest fee that they're going to win. They could have the lowest demand. And so that's where header bidding allows all of that to compete and then return net of fees. Here's how much money we'll pay you. So the publisher then has a very easy job because they don't have to calculate all that fee structure. They say, oh, net of fees, this SSP, SSP B wants to give me $3.21. That's the highest bid for this particular impression. We'll let it go to them.
Do you feel that structure changes a little bit with all the advances with DSPs? I mean, we're hearing about OpenPath from Trade Desk, and I mean, you guys even at Audiohook do the same thing. You are connecting directly to inventory sources. How much does that change? I mean, today or traditionally, the value of the SSP was to set up those deals with demand partners, bundle it and represent it, have different connections to different demand partners, have different rates, like you're saying. But does the lines get a little bit blurred between pre-bid and SSP in today in podcasting? Like, would you say that the average publisher would be in a disadvantage if they went with a single SSP and connected to all the same demand partners versus if they went with pre-bid and connected to multiple SSPs right next to multiple demand partners?
Yeah. So when I put my publisher hat on, I think the answer for publishers is always get as much demand as possible, right? Whether that's directly through a DSP, whether that's through SSPs, 5 SSPs, 2 SSPs, 10 DSPs, however those connections are coming in, the more demand that you have is ultimately going to drive up prices for you. So that's rule number one. I wouldn't get overly fixated on what acronym they're using. Now, I will say that if we look at the history of ad tech, we've seen this pendulum kind of swing back and forth. So in the early days, there were just SSPs and there were just DSPs. And then because they perform to some extent similar functions, a lot of the SSPs started DSPs and some of the DSPs started SSPs, and the lines got blurry. And then they separated again, where then it became more clear, hey, you just have SSPs and you just have DSPs. I think speaking and representing for the SSPs, auctions, whether it's programmatic or however you're doing this, it's a two-sided marketplace, right? On the one hand, you have advertisers and their interests. And then on the other hand, you have publishers and their interests. SSPs at the end of the day have the publisher's heart, the publisher's interest at their heart, or that's their focus. They want to make the publisher as much money as possible. Their alignment their alignment, for lack of better words, is not to advertisers. Similarly, DSPs are trying to help advertisers succeed. And that's who they represent at the end of the day. And so, is there a perfect altruistic world where you can have one party that has both parties, interests at heart? Sure, maybe, right? History tends to show us that in general doesn't work. And I think the classic example of this, and where you have to be careful of this, is if we look at Magnite, which is an SSP and an ad exchange. They used to be called Rubicon. And this was kind of a classic study that showed how these things go south, because Rubicon or Magnite offered at one point a DSP and an SSP. And what people found out is that they were charging the DSP advertisers that were using their DSP, they were charging them a bunch of fees. And then they were also charging the publishers a bunch of fees. And they were taking fees on both sides of the marketplace, if you will, double dipping, if you will. And the market did not like that. Advertisers and publishers did not like that. And so as a result of that, Magnite came out and said, look, we're only going to be an SSP. At least at the time they said that. We're only going to be an SSP. They shut down their DSP side of the business and focused on just being an SSP. So again, not to say that you can't have something that does both. But that's the nice thing. That's the nice thing about pre-bid is like all of this nuance gets worked out, because whoever your demand partner is, whatever acronym they have, at the end of the day, they give you the final number to a publisher and say, we're willing to pay you $3.12. Who cares if they're taking 20% fees or 80% fees or whatever the fee structure is? You can compare apples to bananas. And so you just get a bunch of demand partners in there. And ultimately that drives up competition and will drive up the CPM for a publisher.
So basically what you're saying is that the value here is to have everything in that same pot, treat it as equal and let them take their best shot at it. Like if you have a direct relationship with a buyer and they're willing to pay you $25 CPM, but like they only respond 1 out of 10 times, but some of the SSP partners you work with can get them to respond 7 out of 10 times, but they take 20% total, it's still worth it to see it. You're saying that it's like, at the end of the day, if that demand partner gets your request multiple times through multiple different angles, and that's the best bid for each of those partners, you still win because you get to pick the best of the best.
Correct.
That's cool. Well, but on a technical standpoint, I just want to make sure that I'm not like super simplifying it. Both basically the same thing, right? It's a VAST tag that calls a bunch of demand, right? Whether that's a VAST tag to pre-bid technology that calls out to all these other VAST tags, most likely, or server-side relationship, which would be way better, or it's a VAST tag to an SSP that calls out to these other solutions. Like a publisher is likely not going to interact with this any different way on their hosting platform and ad serving end.
Generally speaking, yes, that's a fair statement. You can interact with these things in other methods than a VAST tag. But that's certainly a common way that people implement it with. The other thing to clarify here is, we use this term header bidding. And again, that came from the display space where there's actually a header of a web page. I commonly get asked this question about podcasting of like, well, does header bidding work in podcasting? Because there is no header. This is all done server side. And the answer is yes, of course it does, right? Again, header bidding was kind of a name that it got coined with. Header bidding, as again, we like to call it as an industry, now supports what's called client side kind of header bidding, as well as server side. And so in the audio space, it would be a server side integration. There is no header in the page. That's totally okay. And it works the same way by your hosting platform making a single server-side call out to a partner, whether that's an SSP, whether that's another partner, a different ad server, but it's all done through server-side calls. So header bidding, yes, we know there's not a header in podcasting. It still works. It's just the term that everybody refers to it as.
No, that's smart to clarify there. Okay, so I think we have the groundwork for this here, and I think this is really smart. As I've said, everybody should be exploring programmatic. You should be on a hosting platform that supports it in some capacity. You're missing out if you're not. Now, if you're with a platform that handles it completely for you, that's fine. That's awesome. They're going to be taking advantage of things like pre-bid in the future, so don't worry. Well, actually, you know what? Do worry. Ask them questions about it. Make sure that they're on the cutting edge of it. But for the people that I'm talking to, the people that want this in their own hands, this is really exciting because an SSP is buying into somebody else's technology and having them handle it for you, and there's a fee associated with it. The coolest thing that we haven't touched on here about Prebid is that because it's a framework, you can stand up your own service for it. One of the things that I want to highlight now, and I want to switch into this, is Prebid as a committee has tapped Jordan and team to start the audio subcommittee for it. I'm so excited about that because that means that we're starting to get more and more attention in podcasting as a major channel. There are differences between streaming audio, and everybody is really focused on trying to figure out how we get everything to mesh so that you can view things more omni-channel. But this is amazing because it means that there's going to be a framework in the very near future that allows anybody to stand up their own pre-bid solution, or allows people like Audiohook and some other people out there to offer a like hosted solution, which is still yours to manage, and more of a SaaS model, I assume, than say like an SSP model, which is the percent of spend. So, Jordan, can you talk a little bit about how you got that going with the pre-bid committee?
Yeah. So again, coming from the display and video world, this is something that is really table stakes nowadays. Any kind of semi-sophisticated display publisher leverages header bidding and in general pre-bid. And the reason I say that is, again, initially when header bidding got popular, every SSP came out with their own solution. Now, this became a little problematic because you kind of ended up in the same solution, right? Like, okay, and now who do I choose for my header bidding partner, right? I've got 5 choices. I have to pick one of them. Again, we don't want to do this like waterfall approach. And what happened, which is awesome, a number of SSPs said, hey, why don't we put our tech together and create an independent committee to kind of really maintain these standards, maintain the code. So it's independent of any vendor. Because again, while most vendors, are honest and reputable, ad tech does have a history of vendors not being fully transparent about what they're doing. And so slowly over the last 10 years, nearly every SSP partner in the display world has shut down their header bidding solution and put their support behind Prebid. And so Prebid, as I mentioned earlier, is an independent organization. They're the ones that manage the standards. They actually manage the code repositories. And so if I'm a display publisher, I can then go work directly with Prebid or one of their partners. Now, one of the things to be very clear about here, Brian, is Prebid does not provide like a hosted solution. You can't just go sign up with Prebid and be like, here's my money. I want you guys to do all this work for me. They manage the code and the specifications, but they do not provide hosted solutions. So as a publisher, you have really 2 options. You can either, host the code yourself. You can download it and run it on a server and have some engineering resources to help with that. Or you can use a provider. The IAB has a bunch of like certified providers. You can go use one of their providers and ask that provider, hey, what flavor of Prebid are you running? There's different versions. Like I said, there's also server side versus client side. And Prebid, the Prebid specification is different for each medium. So display has one, video has one, AMP has another one. And so the evolution to including audio to us seemed fairly natural. And so we started reaching out and having conversations with them about, hey, why isn't audio included in this? It no longer is a second-class citizen. That's one of the things I advocate for more than anything. Audio is a first-class citizen and provides just as much ROI, if not more ROI, than a lot of these other channels, in my belief. And so reached out to them and said, hey, why don't we get audio incorporated into this? Their board met, they approved it. And that was kind of the evolution.
That's awesome. That's really exciting that they were so open to it, right? Like podcasting has made it. Like we were talking earlier this year about how people are upset that we're not having, triple digit % growth year over year or month over month anymore. This is a sign of making it. And a sign of making it is being invited into these committees or having these conversations where an expert like yourself brings it up and gets people interested in supporting it and making space for it. I know that, this is going to go live before we end up at Podcast Movement Evolutions. We have the Sounds Profitable, business space, for all of our partners there. We're going to do some open networking. One of the things that we're going to work on, and we'll start messaging about it soon, is getting people together to talk about pre-bid, whether it's the people that will be invited to the committee or generally people interested in it. And Jordan will be there to talk about it too, because I think that that's really valuable. We want to be transparent. Jordan and I really connected forever ago on the idea of transparency in the space. You've seen the examples that he's highlighted here about the problems with advertising in the past. I mean, we both have very long ad tech histories here. And, he listed the Magnite example. The other thing to really list is there's an active lawsuit, I think, against Google for how they handled the different types of bid tiers that they did in a programmatic funnel. There's
been a few examples, right? Index had some of their own issues. Google and Facebook were doing some shady things together for a minute there. So while I am part of ad tech, I think it's trust but verify. And while I think the podcast space is a good space, I think there's a lot of great partners. I haven't seen any bad partners out there. In this space, I think trust but verify is always a good way to go about it, and it can be a really helpful tool. Not only, to be clear, not only for publishers to help monetize and get and increase their monetization, but this is a really powerful tool for advertisers as well, because ultimately, if a publisher is only running, say, direct sold campaigns, yes, they're missing out on potentially higher CPMs from other brands that are willing to pay them more. But B, it's also impacting the advertiser because it means they're getting potentially less reach because they're not being able to advertise on all of the podcasts and content that they would like to advertise on. So it really is the cheesy win-win where this helps publishers make more money, but it also helps advertisers, brands, marketers greatly extend their reach. And who doesn't want that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that is going to change how people view podcasting. I think that the difficulties that people complain about in podcasting have prevented people from kind of running over it, paving over it and making it just like all the other channels. But it's allowed for people like Jordan, like myself, to try this new angle, right? We have to prove ourselves. When we raise our hands and say that we're ad tech, we're going to get those bad looks, but we have the opportunity for podcast ad tech to be what we want it to be, and to be an example for all of ad tech. So we're looking at sometime this year, the pre-bid framework to be available. I think that Jordan and I are really committed to making that visible to everybody, so that if people need to learn how they can stand it up themselves, if they want access to some of the partners that, and I'm sure a lot of the partners that are going to be involved in the committee will be offering their own version of this solution, which is great. More opportunities. In the same way that I don't, you can host your own WordPress or you can use the hosted WordPress. It's not a bad idea to sometimes work with an expert that can get you live quick and then determine if you want to take it on internally. But these changes to ad tech in podcasting are going to allow more publisher control. Websites and ad servers in display and video are not integrated in the same way that hosting platforms and ad serving is in podcasting. We're going to need to break that dynamic up a bit. And I think that this is a really smart first step. And yeah, I'm so excited to be able to work with you on this, and really, impressed that this was like a priority for you to focus on as a relatively new DSP, especially a new one in audio.
Well, and one of the things I want to clarify too, Bryan, is Audiohook is not an SSP. We don't have any SSP ambitions. We're not trying to help publishers with monetization. However, the reason that this became so important is at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat, if you will, right? A high tide raises all ships. And if publishers aren't successful in monetizing their inventory, ultimately creators don't get the compensation that they need and deserve. And if creators aren't getting the compensation that they need or deserve, guess what? We have less podcasts, right? And if we have less podcasts, this industry starts to shrivel and nobody succeeds, whatever side of the fence you're on. And so it was my perspective of we need to make sure that publishers are earning a fair share and that their creators are earning a fair share to help grow this space. If this space grows, again, all of us benefit. And so while we don't have any, publisher monetization ambitions, we certainly represent advertisers, and we want to help advertisers get more reach and help them get better ROI. And so again, pre-bid and header bidding in general really helps both sides. And so, that's where a lot of our motivation came from out of this was, if we can have the industry succeed and grow, we're all going to do a lot better. And so, anyways, just wanted to kind of, add in our perspective and motivations and ambition that kind of drove some of this.
I thank you for highlighting it. I think that's really important. I think that seeing partners in this space that are really focused on the whole A to Z is really great, because that's the truth of it. Podcasting is small, but it can be bigger. Our fights today are not with each other. It's with getting new advertising dollars and new buyers into our space. That's what's really important. So the tech being accessible, adhering to bigger standards, getting people to adopt our standards, and making sure that the publisher and the buyer have as much flexibility as possible for what parts work for them. That's how we succeed. Locking things down, handling all sides of the same equation can muddy the waters. So this is really exciting to see as a priority for a company of your size.
Well, thank you. And we appreciate the opportunity to be on your great podcast.
Thanks for coming back.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you for listening to that conversation. Here are my thoughts, questions, takeaways. Are you ready to get into it, Bryan Barletta?
I'm always ready.
So, Bryan, pre-bid got its roots in display. It started by using a waterfall approach, which is not ideal for publishers or ad partners. Talk to me a little bit about that. Why is it not ideal?
Yeah, so waterfall means like hard order, right? Like you call 1 first and then 2 and then 3, like literally a waterfall. So that means that if you call 1, like let's say you call multiple programmatic partners, you're saying, hey, do you have an ad for me? And they say, nope, I don't. And then the second one says, yes, I do. And it's $20. And then the third one says, like you never called the third one because the $20 one gets filled. But the third one would have responded with $25. Like the first one to respond wins. It's on the publisher to set the order based on the perceived value of that specific partnership. But programmatic's supposed to be flexible. That's the hard part there. So there's no easy way to do that without a substantial waterfall calling the same partners multiple times at different levels with different floors and whatnot. So that's why waterfall isn't in anybody's best interest and why pre-bid became really attractive.
Yeah. Pre-bid came about to make a unified auction that called everyone at the same time and then lets them bid on who wants to be displayed there. So you're getting the best bang for your buck as the publisher.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not only the supply side platforms, the SSPs, that represent inventory and work really hard to create relationships with demand side platforms and other buyer entities. But it's also the demand side platforms directly now. That's been a big push for those demand side platforms to connect directly with the publisher and kind of skip that path. It's the ability to do those private marketplaces at the same time as doing open marketplaces, programmatic guarantee, and all of these other things all at the same time, because it's basically just saying, if you want this impression, tell us what it's worth. And that dollar amount is what wins it, right? The highest dollar amount wins. If you need to serve something as a higher priority, you do. You serve it above that, direct sold or programmatic guarantee or all these other different options you have there. But the pre-bid is basically the way to say, when we get to the point where it's the only thing that matters is highest price, help me as a publisher get the best opportunity possible.
And the reason that we wanted to have Jordan on the show is because pre-bid is coming for audio, which we see as a good thing. Jordan and his team have been tasked with this. What does that say for podcasting? To me, yay, let's go.
The only thing I want to highlight there is that Jordan pushed for it. Like I'm really impressed by that. Jordan saw the opportunity and the need there and really pushed for it. And I think it's really exciting. I think this is another great example, is that podcasting is not getting the attention it needs in other channels because there's not that much money in it yet. So people like Jordan, people like myself, and all the others who are going to participate in this are going to be responsible for building this, making it valid and making it accessible to all these people who do have tons of money that they want to spend in advertising and then evangelize podcasting. What I can say right now is that nobody's closing the doors on us. I don't know if they're opening doors or if they're just like leaving it unlocked. But we're not being welcomed in yet. We're just not being told to leave. And I think this is honestly a great first step because it allows us to prove ourselves. We're going to have to be hungry this year. We're going to have to work really hard.
I'm very hungry.
Put our egos aside. I'm always hungry. Related to that, Manuela sent me the menu for South by Southwest, and let's just say there's going to be some great food there.
She's very good with choosing food. I'm very excited.
But yeah, I think this is an awesome opportunity for us as podcasting to just say like, okay, well, what is podcasting and what are we not going to kind of concede on? And then what are we willing to? Like, what aspects are we willing to say like, okay, cool, maybe that worked for now, but if we need to get the next $10 billion in our space, where do we kind of have to suck it up and say, we were wrong, let's do it. Like, let's change your pattern. And I think that's going to be a lot of what we discover this year, like what we need to do to win over mainstream advertising, because we're just the bottom of it.
You really think we're the bottom?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sure that you can find somebody smaller, but $2 billion in the US for ad spend is really pretty rough. Like I wrote the other day, and I truly believe this, if this is the cap and we're just going to turn on ourselves and kind of like argue and fight with each other.
Yeah, no thank you.
Yeah, well then we should all get better jobs elsewhere. Like I really truly believe that. Or podcasting should just be like, we're influencer marketing now. Mm-hmm. And we just take advantage of a bigger market cap. But I think we are on the smaller end. I think we're incredibly appealing. And I think a lot of the categories we compete with are very comfortable like rolling up into certain things. Like our first interview was with Jason Hansen. Like the first Sounds Profitable podcast interview was with him.
Throwback.
And he works at Wrapify, which wraps cars with visual ads. Now, if you segment that out into wrapped cars, we might give them a run for their money as an industry. But if you call it out of home, I don't know. I think that the ads that we see in billboards and in Times Square and at the gas station might have us beat a little bit. So podcasting's biggest category is audio. And if we roll up into audio, we're doing great. But podcasting is small, and we need to fix that.
So Jordan and team, and then other folks in the podcast, audio, and advertising space will be working on bringing pre-bid to the podcast space over the next year or so. You mentioned that there's going to be some movements coming in the next few months. So obviously, podcasts, audio do not have headers, right? So what does this practically look like for publishers?
In the same way today where you would make one ad call, like programmatic today fits into podcasting weird. It's still a campaign unless your hosting platform sets it up, but it still kind of works in there, and it still works on a waterfall. When it is time to call programmatic, whether you can set that yourself as the first priority or it's automatically set as a lesser priority, instead of calling one SSP, then another SSP, then a demand side partner, then a marketplace, or all those things individually in a waterfall, when you get into the segment of your inventory that's programmatic, it's going to be one call out to pre-bid that then from that instance, that thing that's set up, the pre-bid instance, it's going to call all of those partners at the same time, get all of their responses, figure out what the best answer is, and return that back there. So instead of 4 calls that all could take 300 milliseconds each, 1.2 seconds if they all took until the end of it, which, adds up, especially if you do that for every single ad slot you have on there. It's going to be 300 milliseconds max because it's one call that calls all the other calls, gets the response, and provides one answer. So
go ahead.
I realize that I probably overcomplicated it. Functionally, a publisher will likely reduce the number of programmatic campaigns in their platform and make one external call per ad unit, per ad slot to this pre-bid solution that then handles all their external calls.
So let's bring in another concept that we like to talk about here at Sounds Profitable, which is brand safety and suitability. How does brand safety and suitability fit into this call, into the pre-bid call?
At the same time that we're doing this, there's great conversations going on at the IAB. The team at Magnite Trade Desk and Katz Digital are very active in these conversations, and it's been very fun working with them. There are others, but those are the loudest in the room with me. And the mindset is that in programmatic calls, we're going to have bare minimum requirements. The full RSS URL for the show that it's attached to, the episode URL so that you can figure out the exact media file that needs to be downloaded and examined, the IAB categories, which we're having great conversations with getting the podcast categories into the IAB index, or figure out the appropriate mapping so that we can just have one solution going forward. All that info is going to need to be passed from the hosting platform through Prebid to all of the programmatic partners so that they can decision on it. And what I can say is today there is a lot of unknown inventory in programmatic and a lot of unknown inventory when we do like network style buys. People are not sharing that information. We have an opportunity to be better than every other industry and provide that transparency today. And I understand that people are afraid that if they provide a programmatic solution and they can see, the publisher can see what the advertiser is, or the advertiser can see the publishers that they're working on, they'll go direct. We got to get over it. Like, that can't be what holds us back. So we're going to need to make everything transparent. And I think that this solution is going to be a big part of it. And I think the truth is that when these networks provide these obfuscated reports and don't share that level of transparency as programmatic, publishers are going to focus on programmatic because advertisers are going to demand that transparency.
I think with that, I love ending on a note of transparency. I think that's a great way to look ahead towards the future. We'll close it out for the week. Thank you to Bryan and thank you to Jordan for having this conversation, this enlightening conversation. I encourage folks to check out the work that Audiohook is doing and to connect with Jordan on LinkedIn if the work that Audiohook is doing is interesting to you. I think that we have a lot of work to do, but I think we have a clear path ahead of what is going to make us more successful in podcasting than in industries before us. Hey, listener, we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of this episode? Please reach out if you have any questions or comments. I'm on Twitter at Ari This and That, and Bryan is at Bryan Barletta. We are also active on LinkedIn. Just search for Sounds Profitable. Oh, and of course, we have our Sounds Profitable Twitter. It's at SoundsProfNews. If you want to send us an email, that's podcast@soundsprofitable.com.
We record this podcast with Squadcast. Their cloud recording studio captures high-quality audio and video. We use it for all of our podcast recordings and deep dives. You can try out Squadcast free by going to squadcast.fm, signing up for a free trial, and using code SPPartners for an extension on that trial. Again, that's squadcast.fm, and the code is SPPartners.
Want more from Sounds Profitable? You can get more information about all that we offer at soundsprofitable.com.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Sounds Profitable with me, Bryan Barletta.
And me, Arielle Nissenblatt.
This episode is put together using Spooler. It's edited by Reese Carman and Ron Tendick, and it's hosted on Art19.